So to start, we just want to give sort of an overview of all the main types of pain research that are going on, because it falls into sort of different buckets that go all the way from like the cells and tiny pieces of how basic biology works, all the way through human trials and then into healthcare systems to see, when we move from the lab to real world settings, how well do these kinds of treatments that we're making actually work. So at that most basic level, we call this preclinical or basic science. And what this kind of research wants to ask is, how does pain work? And so it tends to be done in labs where we're using either human cells or human tissues, but not actual like human participants who are living. And then also in models of pain. So this could be in the form of animals or in computers. And the outcome that this kind of research asks is looking for ways that we can actually make treatments for at that like cell or kind of like brain chemical level to move eventually into humans. And that's where we get into translational research. So it's sort of the bridge between going from that most basic science to work in humans. And this kind of research is asking for how can we take what we learned from that preclinical basic research and use it to create treatments. So this is also done in labs in human cells and tissues, animals, and sometimes also in very early testing in humans. So very, very small pilot trials because we want to make sure things are safe before really scaling it up to bigger kinds of clinical trials. And the outcome from this type of research is looking for a new treatment or a new test to get ready to try in people or in larger groups of people. And that's where we get into clinical research. And so clinical research is really saying, how can we take what we've learned from basic translational and apply it to humans? And so this is done in labs and can also be done in real world clinics with human participants. So these are actual living human beings who are going through treatments or who are trying to see how different parts of biology or different parts of their mood or their social environment play a role in what type of pain they feel and whether they might have a kind of response or benefit from treatment. And so this tells us what most likely causes or treats pain for different people and why. So you can imagine that there needs to be a lot of money that goes into pain research in order for us to have actual treatments and advances, better knowledge about what is causing pain to come from this research. So in the US, we have kind of a few main buckets of pain research funding. The first is the US government. And the biggest funder is the National Institutes of Health. And this sits in what's called the Department of Health and Human Services, where you might have heard also of the CDC, the FDA, and AHRQ, which is the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality. A couple of other big funders of pain research are the Department of Defense and the Department of Veterans Affairs. Then there are some agencies that are not part of the government themselves, but they're supported by Congress or other sorts of government funding. And so this one is PCORI, which you might have heard of, which is the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute. And this is another big funder of pain research. And then finally, there are some smaller nonprofits that give out more kind of like funding for early projects that they're not really large scale. They're really done on sort of either small groups of people or in animals. And this is funded through nonprofit organizations. So I'm going to give just an overview, or Laura and I will give an overview of just a couple of the biggest funders, so the National Institutes of Health and PCORI, and what active programs they have going on. We could go into all of these, but like I said, it would take a little too much time. So for the sake of making sure you get as much information from the other areas, we'll move on to the National Institutes of Health.
Hey, well, thanks, Janelle. I really appreciate it. And it's very nice to be on here with all of you guys today. To get started, I'm going to give you a little bit of background on NIH And this slide shows over the last 20 plus years how NIH has been funding pain research. NIH makes it public about how much dollars they fund on a specific condition every year. So what you can see on this slide is starting in 2002, NIH was funding less than $200,000 per year. And over the course of time between 2002 and 2024, NIH increased their funding for pain research up to $1 billion. So this is a big jump in funding over the last 20 plus years. And I want to highlight two time points that really resulted in a shift in this funding. The first is in 2010 when the Affordable Care Act was passed. And the reason why this is an important point to touch on is that two laws related to the Affordable Care Act discussed pain research. One was wanting us to coordinate pain research and pain policy across the federal government. So as Janelle just showed some of those agencies that fund pain research, this law was really trying to increase that communication and coordination across the federal government. And the second law was really trying to increase coordination of pain research within the NIH. So, really trying to have the federal government have a better sense of what type of research was already being funded and where were some of the gaps in the pain research that really could help improve people's lives living with chronic pain or acute pain. And so what you'll see between 2010 and 2018 is a slow increase in funding, which was really starting to address those gaps that became more apparent. And then in 2018, you'll see another time point where there's a big jump in funding. And that's when Congress gave NIH funds for the Helping to End Addiction Long-Term Initiative. Next slide. And so the goal of the Helping to End Addiction Long-Term Initiative was to increase pain research and really trying to get a sense of ways to improve pain management, as well as increasing funding on the opioid epidemic. And for the purposes of our conversation, we're going to spend more time on the pain side, but really the HEAL initiative came out of a place of identifying the gaps in pain research. And by consulting with researchers, people with lived experience, and clinicians to get a sense of what is needed in the pain field in order to improve pain care. Next slide, please. So the first arm of where the HEAL initiative was funding research was in the preclinical and translational space, which Janelle just explained. And really these grants were focused on understanding how pain biology works at the levels of the cells and brain chemicals, and to come up with tests that for new, safe, and non-opioid treatments that hopefully would work better than what was already out there. Next slide. And then the other arm of the HEAL initiative was really funding clinical research in pain management. So this meant funding research in humans to test why and how either acute or chronic pain happens, and to come up with tests and new treatments that act on the biology, to those that teach coping skills or change how pain care gets to people. And the HEAL initiative also really wanted to increase the workforce of pain researchers so that there could be more people studying pain to then hopefully translate that research into clinical care for people living with pain. Next slide. So the Helping to End Addiction Long-Term Initiative has a website that you are more than welcome to check out that we have here as their QR code. It's worth noting that on average, a research project takes about 5 years to complete. Because of COVID, some of those initial grants that were funded by the NIH and the HEAL initiative took a little bit longer to complete. So we are just finishing, the NIH is just finishing getting those findings, and the researchers are publishing those results. So as those results become available and those projects are published, you'll be able to find some of those resources on the HEAL website. So I encourage you to check that out in the future. And I think I'm handing this back over to Janelle next.
Okay, thanks, Laura. So the other research or big funder of pain research that we'll talk about is the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, or PCORI. And so unfortunately, they don't publish their data about, those exact numbers of how much funding they're actually putting into pain research over time. But what they did recently, so this is for 2025, is they actually announced that they're investing $100 million for research on managing pain. And something that is really unique about PCORI is that their kind of research is one that really makes sure people with lived experience are not just, going through a research study, but they're actually partners in coming up with a research study. So these are people who you have people in those research centers, like in universities or hospitals. And then you have people with lived experience who come to the table with those researchers and they say, these are the questions that are most important to us. And this is how we're going to have a research project that is going to answer those questions. And so that announcement about that $100 million investment for pain research is linked at the QR code shown on the screen. And then just to give you some examples of what the agency is looking to fund with that big pool of money is they want to have community engaged research. So that's what CER means. So that just means having people from the community that the research is affecting being a part of the research as partners. They want to look at approaches like non-drug or those more sorts of like complementary and alternative medicine approaches, so things like acupuncture or Tai Chi, to how they can help manage pain and other symptoms in people who have chronic health conditions. And then they're also looking at ways to improve how to prevent, how to screen, how to diagnose, and how to treat pain. And this is especially for people who might have, difficulties with their thinking ability. So in the case of maybe someone with dementia or someone who has had a traumatic brain injury, and so it's really hard for them to express the pain that they're feeling. Another pool of research that they're funding is looking to prevent and treat chronic pain in those more common conditions. So things like chronic low back pain, neck pain, migraine, or neuropathy. And then improving how we intervene on acute pain. So acute pain is more like you break your arm, or if you have surgery and you have pain after that surgery. And so the QR code on the screen just links to the page where it shows all of that information laid out. And then if you want to learn more about the ongoing studies that PCORI has on pain, we have this QR code here. And so, as Laura said, for the NIH, it applies here too, where research projects just really do take a really long time to go from start to end. And some of the studies that PCORI has done do have findings. And so the ones that have that little has results bubble actually show what the results of those studies are. And with that, I actually will turn it back over to Laura.
Thanks, Janelle. So to Janelle's point that research can take some time, the NIH at least was working on strategies about how to speed up getting research results into the hands of people living with pain and or trying to make sure that the research is really relevant to people who are living with chronic pain. So, one example of how the NIH was working on improving the speed of translating research and helping it get into the hands of people living with chronic pain is to improve the communication between government agencies. So, an example of this, I think we have on the next slide, um, is a case example of where the NIH was communicating with the Center of Medicaid and Medicare in order to find ways to increase the coverage of non-pharmacological strategies, sorry, non-medication strategies to treat people who are living with chronic pain who are 65 years and older. And in this case, there was an interest in increasing the access to acupuncture and thinking it might make sense for coverage. But before CMS will cover a treatment, there needs to be enough research in their older adult population. So NIH decided to invest in research grants into acupuncture in adults 65 years and older in order to potentially have CMS cover this treatment. So in the next slide, the outcome of this resulted in CMS supporting coverage of acupuncture for chronic low back pain for people who had pain for 12 weeks or longer, and that they would cover up to 12 treatment sessions. So that's an example of where a research partnership was able to result in a change in clinical care. Next slide. Some other ways that NIH was really trying to think about improving representation of the research studies was one, to make sure that the participants in studies represented the US population so that the results could generalize to more people. And also to think about where research is being done. So making sure that research is being conducted in all 50 states and making sure that research was occurring in rural, suburban, and urban settings to make sure that the different type of treatment strategies could be accessible across the United States. And then another really important area that NIH was focusing on was increasing engagement of people with lived experience as research partners in research studies to make sure that the research that was being funded was important and relevant to people living with pain and to making sure that they were involved from the very onset and the beginning of the research process.